The film begins in a world experiencing an outbreak of a mutated form of rabies that spreads from animals to humans. 4 months after the first infections, over 9 million humans are infected, and the virus is spreading faster than it can be contained. Soon, society collapses as over 7 billion humans are dead or infected. People who are bitten turn rabid in 90 seconds and are called the infected. With the world in chaos, everyone looks for the patient zero. Morgan was riding in a car with his wife Janet when they were attacked. Both were infected, but he remained human, with the ability to communicate with the infected. Now, with a large group of civilians, CDC scientists, and the U.S. military in an underground nuclear base, Scooter wakes Morgan up to prepare him for his work with the virologist Dr. Gina Rose. Together, they bring in the infected and interrogate them, hoping to find patient zero and devise a cure, believing that his blood contains the antivirus. This time, they've received a lot of soldiers. Morgan and Scooter walk through the underground nuclear base, which has been turned into a community by the civilians. When Gina refers to those brought in for interrogation as patients, Colonel Knox becomes irritated, reminding her that these are their enemies, and they are at war. The two are always at odds, and Gina struggles with this tension, compounded by Knox being attracted to Gina, while she's currently intimate with Morgan. They bring a heavily chained infected, who continues to fight against his restraints. Capturing him had caused Colonel Knox a lot of lives when the pack of infected ambushed his soldiers. When Morgan communicates with the infected, even he's surprised at it. Morgan decides to call him Joe Cocker. The man reveals that he's from Minnesota and was infected at the end of October while they were putting up Halloween decorations. Morgan immediately communicates this information to Gina, who looks through her files and realizes that Joe is one of the earliest infected that they're communicating with. Joe then goes on to detail how he ambushed Knox's soldiers due to a gut feeling that pushed him to commit violence, which Morgan compares to lust, saying the two are not so different from each other. Joe further reveals that they were a pack of 250 infected that attacked the soldiers. Morgan can make significant progress with Joe, reminding him of the times lost by wine, and telling him that he wants to help him, but Colonel Knox suddenly makes an announcement, which makes Joe violent, ending the interrogation. Morgan walks out, accusing the colonel of ruining his mission. Knox wants Morgan to go back inside and show some aggression to Joe, but Morgan wants him to calm down before they can proceed, and Gina supports him. Angry, Knox goes inside and shoots Joe. Morgan suddenly enters the containment in a fit of rage and reminds Knox that Joe's history predates any previous record of infection they had, making him a possible link to patient zero, but Knox threatens to shoot Morgan. With Morgan gone, Gina threatens to have Knox stripped of his command, should he overstep his authority again, realizing that Knox did this because Gina denied his advances. Gina goes to find Morgan in a state of distress, who is worried over the fact that the infected are roaming in armies now, but Gina tells him to calm down and take his medication. Morgan doesn't want to, as they give him vivid nightmares of his late wife. While Morgan is talking about his wife, the two begin to kiss. Knox again confronts Gina about having an affair with someone who is partly infected, but Gina tells him that she wouldn't have chosen him if he was the last man on Earth. Morgan visits Janet, who is held captive amongst others in the underground base. She's being treated with an experimental treatment derived from Morgan's blood. He pleads her to keep taking his blood to see if it works. Janet tells Morgan that sometimes she still hears the music. They bring in another infected whom Morgan chooses to call Pete Townsend. However, the infected suddenly becomes violent and starts fighting against his restraints. Scooter rushes inside to shock and subdue him, but is instead bitten in his arm. Morgan and Gina rush him out of the containment along with other soldiers and perform an emergency amputation of his infected arm after injecting him with morphine. When 90 seconds pass, Scooter appears to be normal, and the others believe that he has survived, but he suddenly goes into shock. Knox tells Gina to tie Scooter down, considering him infected, but Gina believes they got Scooter in time and wants to administer him an epinephrine injection. Scooter suddenly starts shaking, and when he regains consciousness, he is infected. Knox shoots him, to the shock of all, but Scooter himself does not want to live as an infected. Knox admits that he will miss him, and goes to the restroom to mourn his loss. Meanwhile, Morgan comforts Gina. At night, he has a dream about his wife. When Morgan goes to interrogate another infected, Gina warns him not to make Scooter's death cloud his judgment, and focus on discovering the location of patient zero. However, Morgan appears to be very aggressive in his interrogation, constantly playing music that tortures the infected. When he turns the music off, the infected, dubbed Pete, reveals his place of birth as Minnesota and time of infection in October, making him the same as Joe. When Morgan asks about patient zero, Pete refuses to answer. Furious, Morgan pulls out a gun, accuses Pete of causing his friend's death, and threatens to shoot him should he not comply, surprising Gina and even Knox with his brashness, but Pete tells him to do it. Morgan and Gina relate their discovery of the Minnesotan pack to General Pierce, believing that the pack is related to patient zero and that they need to focus their search around the area where both of them were captured. But General Pierce considers this might be a ruse. Gina ensures that though the infected are violent, they cannot lie as they do not have the capacity for deceit, but Knox says they cannot risk their soldiers over something so speculative. Gina, to prove her point, reveals to General Pierce how, previously at a Vegas facility, Gina predicted that the infected were showing improved strategic planning skills, which Knox did not accept, and the resulting fight happened exactly as she predicted. Gina believes that the infected are evolving into something smarter and dangerous, and that they are learning, all of which Knox refuses to believe. Morgan supports her and tells Pierce that now that the infected are moving in armies, it might not be long before they are discovered. General Pierce chooses to believe Gina. Morgan goes to visit Janet again to deliver his blood, who asks about the gunshots, but Morgan says everything is okay. Janet can sense that Morgan is having an affair with Gina and pleads for him to let her go, insisting that she's no longer human and loves to be violent. But Morgan holds her hand, tells her that he loves her still, and pleads to her to continue her treatment. Janet suddenly calms down when she remembers her past with Morgan. Morgan goes to test his blood with Gina, who still doesn't know why Morgan's blood is resistant to the virus, but it is slowing down the infection in Janet, though only temporarily. Gina tries to tell Morgan that there may be no hope left for Janet, but Morgan tells her that he doesn't need to hear this today. She suddenly confesses her feelings for him and tells him to move over Janet, which irritates Morgan. Gina goes to sob in the restroom when she learns that she's tested positive for pregnancy. At night, Morgan has a dream about the turbulent times he spent with his wife when he was forced to sell their wedding rings to keep paying the electricity bill. Morgan considered going back to teaching, but Janet prevented him, saying he hates teaching and that they should focus on their record store. This was moments before their car was surrounded by the infected and they were bitten. General Knox is attending the funeral of the fallen soldiers and cremating them, but one of the soldiers is merely pretending to be dead and is infected. He gets up and starts biting the soldiers. Just as General Knox picks up a pistol, however, the infected soldier hides in the shadows to hunt him down. Knox is surprised by one, but can shoot him before being bitten. However, another soldier appears and tries to bite him. Morgan subdues him by holding him in a choke just as soldiers appear to shoot him, but Morgan tells them to calm down since the soldier has said that he wants to speak to anyone who can listen. When Morgan releases him, the soldier raises his hands and allows himself to be arrested. As the soldiers shackle him, he appears unfazed and relaxed. Morgan is surprised that the patient is unaffected by the music that has driven the other infected into a rage. He even lights up and starts smoking a cigarette from his pocket. Gina says that he had a University of Minneapolis campus ID on him as Professor Michael Jansen. Professor Michael says that he's heard rumors of Morgan and came to confirm them, and even knows that Morgan used to be a professor. When Morgan questions about when he was infected, Michael doesn't answer. When he asks why the music doesn't affect him, Michael explains that all infected aren't the same, just as all uninfected aren't the same. When Morgan asks about patient zero, Professor Michael argues that how can he trust his word? Morgan says that all infected have lost the capacity of free will and deceit, but Michael scoffs at this, saying that his mannerisms are not very animal-like. Furthermore, he believes that the infected are evolved humans, a more advanced species who are at the top of the food chain, just as humans once used to be. Morgan asks again about when Michael was infected, and he reveals that he was a college professor, and his school was attacked by the infected during one of his lectures on medieval philosophy. When he went outside to attend a call from his wife, his classroom was attacked. Though Michael tried to escape, he was bitten but still maintained most of his human abilities. After he was infected, Michael went home to see his family, but his violent urges caused him to eat his wife and daughter. Morgan is disgusted by Michael's story, and Michael goes on to insist that the virus has enhanced their brains. Gina suddenly becomes concerned for Morgan and sends him a message, but Morgan insists on patient zero. Michael says that there is none, and that the rage that the virus enhanced within humans had always existed within them, such as political rage against the opposites or the stress of modernity. He considers all of humanity patient zero. Morgan becomes enraged and punches Michael, and Michael comments how they're not so different now. Morgan walks outside to cool down and tells Gina that Michael is debating with him, which enraged him. Gina tells him to go inside and assert dominance. Morgan returns and accepts Michael's smoke. Michael suddenly asks about Morgan's wife, and when Morgan says she's infected, Michael realizes that Morgan's obsession with patient zero relates to his wife. Morgan says that he believes all infected are diseased, and he's looking for a cure. But Michael believes that the virus was the cure for the human virus. He also knows that Morgan is experiencing headaches, and says that is the rage inside of him. Morgan suddenly realizes that Michael has an alternate plan, since he's not answering any of his questions but wasting his time in debates. He asks Gina to bring inside a frequency detector and scans him, but finds nothing. He then goes to Pete Townsend, who is caged downstairs, realizing that this entire thing was a setup and that Pete and Michael wanted to be captured. When he orders the security to open Pete's gate, however, Pete starts violently smashing his head against the pillar until he is knocked out. Morgan discovers that Pete has a transmitter sewn inside his chest, revealing that the infected laid a trap to learn where the base is located. They share this discovery with General Pierce, who puts the facility under lockdown. But it's too late, since the infected swarm inside, killing or infecting all the humans, including civilians, and releasing the prisoners to further attack everyone. Though the soldiers try to fight them, they are easily overpowered. Morgan decides to go look for Janet and tells Gina to meet him upstairs. Suddenly the command center is breached, and Knox and Gina run away, followed by General Pierce. Now overrun, Knox shoots his commander in the leg, so the infected are slowed down long enough for him and Gina to make it to the elevator. Horrified by his actions, Gina grabs his gun and tells him they have to go down to her lab to get her research. He says he wanted to save her life. They begin to scuffle and the gun goes off, killing Knox. Meanwhile, Morgan descends to the cells to free Janet, who is afraid of him. But Morgan insists that he loves her and that the treatment is working. She hesitantly allows him to grab her hand. Meanwhile, the lab is infiltrated. Morgan is leading Janet out, but he comes across Gina, who finds Morgan releasing Janet. Gina pleads with him to leave Janet since the treatments work, but only temporarily, but he refuses. An infected suddenly attacks her, but Gina can shoot her down. She goes to her lab to retrieve her samples, and Morgan and Janet accompany her. They manage to sneak inside, but an infected soldier awakens and attacks. Morgan takes him out with a fire axe. They can no longer leave through the exit and crawl through the vents. While climbing up, Gina almost falls when an electricity box breaks, but they continue to climb. They venture into the vents above the common area, where Gina is horrified to see a massacre. Suddenly, the vent pipe starts to break under their pressure, and they are spotted by the infected. They start running for the exit. Other smarter infected appear to free Michael. They encounter an infected lab rat, which Janet kills before it can get to Gina. However, more infected people appear inside the vents. Morgan can survive by kicking them down just as the vent breaks, and Gina saves him from falling. They make it to the parking lot just below ground level, but the professor confronts them, saying he cannot allow them to leave. He explains that he came to the base to kill Morgan. Morgan is their patient zero and is a threat to their survival. They fight, with Morgan being assisted by Janet and Gina, until Morgan impales him on a pipe, wounding himself in the process. The professor starts calling the other infected. The trio flees until Janet tells them to run, and she will buy them time, telling Morgan he must leave her to save the baby, as she senses that Gina is pregnant. This distracts Morgan long enough for Janet to close a heavy vault door just in time to stop the horde. Through a window in the door, Janet wipes a tear from her face, indicating that she is now able to cry, and that the treatment is working and restoring her humanity, and mouths, "I love you." Morgan and Gina follow the tunnel out to the woods surrounding the bunker. They see the infected invading it, and Morgan finds his motorcycle. Together they can reach it, and Morgan turns it on, which attracts the infected. They ride off into the night, with Morgan understanding that he must do whatever it takes to take care of their baby and save some remnant of the human race, and the movie ends.